PFAS coating.
Packaging that has PFAS.
Investigation.
Very disturbing toxicity properties.
Our land is contaminated.
The state took no action.
And it was a challenge.
PFOA and PFOS.
I'm worried about the future health of my generation.
They were seen as a miracle chemical.
Here at Singing Pastures Farm, we focus on creating the most regenerative pork that's available in the whole world.
Maine has some of the best local farmers markets. People come from other places to have the Maine experience. And part of the Maine experience isn't just having lobster and blueberries. It's also being able to have homegrown tomatoes or homegrown pork. I think one of the really wonderful things is our communities value their farmers. They want to promote their farmers. And it's really, really important that we do that because farming is a hard financial business to be in and they need as much support from the community as possible. All of the farmers here are part of the culture of Maine.
Wentworth, and I'm co-owner with my wife Flora of Frinklepod Farm. Our customer base around like a really genuine knowledge of what our business is about and how we produce food here.
I think Maine rightly takes a lot of pride in supporting small family-owned farms and in the quality and cleanliness of its agricultural products. It's part of the state pride that we have amazing local farms who are producing goods that we can all just buy at the local farmer's market and get them direct and healthy from the farm. And that's, an image we want to preserve, and that's an image we want to maintain.
Singing Pastures Farm and Frinklepod Farm are certified organic farms with healthy, clean products. Maine farms are known for this kind of thing, which is why it was so unexpected and concerning to learn about PFAS.
PFAS became a big story in Maine when we learned the details of what happened at Stone Ridge Farm.
Cows mean everything to us. It's always cows first, people second. My name is Fred Stone. I am a dairy farmer in Arundel, Maine. And this is a third generation dairy farm. Milk our cows, do the best we can with our land, and we'd just like to be left alone. Some of our cow families go back over 40 years. I never really realized that PFAS existed. Our nightmare began 2016. And we received a letter from Kennebec Water telling us that they thought that there might be a problem with PFAS levels in the aquifer.
To fully understand what happened at Fred's farm, we must first understand what PFAS are.
PFAS are a class of chemicals that are known as PBTs, which stands for persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic.
The truth is that there's 3,000 to 5,000 variants of PFAS. PFOA and PFOS are two of the best known ones.
And all variants in this class are defined by a chemical bond, more specifically a carbon-fluorine bond.
The carbon-fluorine bond is one of the strongest bonds in all of chemistry, which means these chemicals don't break down. We call them forever chemicals.
They have very long half-lives in the environment, and they have long half-lives in our bodies as well.
The chemical strength that makes PFAS so hard to break down is precisely why they were developed in the first place.
Anything that is water or stain resistant was potentially a PFAS chemical. It's been used since the 50s in a variety of products. Teflon is the famous example, but it's used in all sorts of coatings for fabrics. So practically any outerwear, any jacket, likely has a PFAS coating on it.
Outdoor gear, microwave popcorn bags, stain-resistant rugs, non-stick cookware, and other consumer products all use PFAS. And also, PFAS were used in firefighting foam.
One of the big uses of PFAS was in firefighting foam, and for a long time, the U.S. government actually required the use of PFAS-containing firefighting foams at airports and other facilities where there might be large oil-based fires. Through all those uses, some of it gets washed down the drain, and whatever goes down the drain has got to end up somewhere. And at sewage treatment plants, a large percentage of what gets washed down the drain that's solid ends up in the sludge.
Sewer sludge is the mud-like byproduct of wastewater treatment. The nutrient-rich material is sometimes spread on farm fields as a fertilizer. The problem is sludge can be contaminated with chemicals, like PFAS.
These contaminants can build up over time and then enter into crops that the animals eat, like hay and corn, and then get passed through to the milk.
And then we drink the milk, and the PFAS ends up in us. But PFAS can enter humans in other ways too. It can build up in and contaminate crops, livestock, and fish. It can be inhaled as PFAS-containing products break down in our homes. From sludge, firefighting foam, and manufacturing plants, PFAS can leach into the earth and even contaminate the water we drink, all of which is problematic.
If you're exposed to a large amount of PFAS, that may be in your system for literally decades to come.
Very disturbing toxicity properties.
Properties we've only started to fully understand in the past decade.
They have been linked to a number of different health problems, including a couple forms of cancer, birth defects.
Increased cholesterol associated with liver and thyroid damage. They can be associated with some learning difficulties and other problems in kind of normal child development. Those are likely to be something that a child at a very young age can be exposed to and then have a challenge for the rest of their life.
So PFAS are a class of chemicals, and that defining carbon-fluorine bond makes them really useful in products, foams, and manufacturing. But the chemicals leach into the environment and don't break down. They enter our farms, our food, our water, and even the air in our homes. And they can cause major problems when they enter humans. So what's being done about it?
My name is Patrick McRoy. I am the Deputy Director at the Environmental Health Strategy Center. We've been around now for over 15 years, working to try to protect people from toxic chemicals as well as promote safer alternatives.
Based in Portland, Maine, the Environmental Health Strategy Center is a nonprofit that strives towards a world where all people are healthy and thriving in a safe environment.
We're well known in Maine for our work in getting toxic chemicals out of food, water, and products.
And the center leads grassroots efforts to change and create new legislation like they've done with PFAS.
PFAS has been an emerging issue for quite some time, and we are definitely aware of increased attention to it nationally. Most of that attention was driven by drinking water contamination that was caused by the release of PFAS-containing firefighting foam into the environment. And Maine, fortunately, had not had a lot of that type of contamination. Then we found out about Stone Ridge Farm. The local water district was required to test for a handful of PFAS chemicals because of a federal rule. The water district actually found the PFAS chemicals in their water. The water district had a well located on Stone Ridge Farm, and when they found the high levels of PFAS in those wells, they notified Fred Stone, the farmer.
At that time, it was decided that we have two choices. First choice is to say nothing, because the state doesn't test for this. Second choice is to immediately notify the state that there might be a problem with the aquifer. And obviously we took the second.
Notified his dairy and the state that there was high levels of these contaminants in his water.
We went to the state with this problem not the other way around.
They in turn tested the milk and found high levels of these chemicals in the milk that his cows were producing.
The number that they had come up with was 146. EPA recommendation was 7.
And that then led the state to do an investigation of the farm to try to figure out where these chemicals were coming from and how they were getting into the groundwater that contaminated both the public water supply as well as Fred's milk.
And what they found is the only probable source was sludge that had been applied to Fred's farm.
Most of the sludge came from municipal sewer districts.
And the last time that we have done any sludge spreading on this farm would have been in 2004. Today those fields are just as radioactive as they were when they were spread. That, my friend, is the scary part.
The collective application of that sludge, which was used as fertilizer on the fields, resulted in that high level of PFAS being in his soil, leaching down into the groundwater, and then contaminating the cow's feed, the cows, and eventually the milk.
It was late 2016 when the Water District notified Fred of the contaminants, and the state finalized an investigation into the issue by the summer of 17.
We came up with a plan, as it were, to eliminate all contaminated feed from the dairy operation. We put in a water filtration system. That cleaned the water up, so the state tested all this. And the idea was to get our milk numbers down.
And the frustrating part is that when Fred was doing the sludge spreading, he always had his DEP permits and followed government rules. In fact, the town encouraged him to spread the sludge.
We were able to get our cows to non-detect, and we did start shipping milk again.
Over time, Fred was able to get new cows, put in a water filtration system, and was finally able to restart business by the fall of 2018. But then, more trouble hit.
Our milk levels started to go back up. So in January of this year, our numbers were over again.
And at that point then, Fred had his milk license suspended by the state, so he couldn't produce anymore. But otherwise, the state took no action to address the source of contamination, identify additional potentially impacted farms, or assess the safety of milk from other producers.
And the story remained under the radar until the spring of 2019.
My colleagues and I at the Environmental Health Strategy Center learned about more details of the case from Fred's attorney. We then requested from the state the investigation file, and when we read it, we realized that this problem had the potential to impact farms not only across Maine, but across the country. Many farms, several hundred at least across Maine, used the same sort of material as Fred used.
And the Environmental Health Center said enough is enough.
We worked with Fred, who decided that it was time for his story to become public. So we contacted some journalists that we knew who cover this type of story and kind of explained the context of what had happened at Stone Ridge Farm and what that meant more broadly for human health and the environment. And we were fortunate that a team of reporters from Reuters was interested in the story and worked diligently to dig up more details and to spend a lot of time interviewing Fred and others who were part of the story to be able to share what had happened to a broader audience.
And that media presence in the public helped kick off a statewide effort to identify more PFAS contamination and to address the larger problems at hand.
The state announced that it was going to require all sludge that might be applied in the future to be tested for PFAS first, which was, as far as we know, the first time in the nation that any government has required sludge to be tested for PFAS before it is applied to farm fields. So that right there was already a significant step forward that came from calling attention to what had happened at Stone Ridge Farm.
But the Environmental Health Strategy Center wanted more than just this one regulation.
We felt the need to begin to figure out how we can change policy to protect farmers and protect consumers from PFAS in agricultural products.
Changing policy is never easy. It takes effort from the community, professionals, and legislators.
So we're in the situation that we're in with having toxic chemicals in the environment, in our bodies, in our food supply, because we haven't had strong environmental legislation. So what we have right now are tens of thousands of chemicals, most of which have not ever been fully vetted. And they were basically grandfathered in when we developed the first chemicals policy in the US, which is called the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA is the abbreviation. And we've had to play catch up ever since. And so that's what states like Maine are doing. They're actually leading the way in terms of really taking all of that information that we've gathered since these chemicals first started being used and since they first started contaminating our environment. And we're using that information about toxicity, about persistence, et cetera, to pass safer laws.
In 2008, Maine passed the Kids Safe Products Act, which required the state to identify toxic priority chemicals and work to eliminate them from children's products. In 2017, Maine legislators overrode a veto to pass an act that phases out all flame retardant chemicals, chemicals that were shown to cause health issues in children and firefighters. These laws are a good starting point to address the public health crisis of toxic chemicals, but nothing was being done to address PFAS, even though it's still in our homes, our food, our clothing, and our water.
The state, learned about the situation at Stone Ridge Farm and finished its investigation back in 2017 under the Paul LePage administration. And at that time, the state did not take much action.
As we know, at this point, the story fell silent. But remember those Reuters reporters? As the story resurfaced and hit the public, things changed.
State Representative Jessica Fay, and I represent House District 66.
In this past legislative session, Maine actually passed a bill
to eliminate PFAS in food packaging. And the governor signed a bill, and that's now the law in Maine.
I was really happy to be the sponsor of LD 1433, the Safe Food Packaging Act. Essentially what the bill does is says that if you have over $1 billion worth of sales, you can't wrap your food in packaging that has PFAS or phthalates and sell it in the state of Maine. Only when there's a safer alternative available.
This is a very important step, not only because food packaging can contaminate the food itself, but also because the packaging can be composted where it then ends up back onto the land to potentially contaminate crops.
So even though the law only applies to those using the packaging, the idea is that big food companies in Maine will have to push their manufacturers making the food packages to develop safer chemicals to use in place of PFAS. And this Maine law is big.
And they were only the second state to do so after the state of Washington.
And such a big law and work of legislative action took a village to pass.
There was definitely a lot of pushback. And it was a challenge.
Quite a large campaign with lots of stakeholders.
Young people who are worried about their future in terms of their health. Folks from wastewater treatment who were worried about how PFAS is impacting their ability to treat the water. Farmers who were worried about their livelihood. Public health advocates come in and talk about the impact of PFAS on the human body and on the environment. It was a very broad group of people who have an interest in.
As a student and a young person, I want a toxin-free world so my future family and I can be healthy. Looking down the road, definitely a green future is important for the sake of just the following generations. You don't really notice as a problem until it can be too late.
I was involved and my students were also involved, writing testimony, delivering testimony, writing letters to their legislators. The legislature is actually quite accessible, and so we as citizens can actually exercise our rights and responsibilities to let our voices be heard.
I am a licensed clinical social worker. I testified last spring on the PFAS legislation because I was worried about the health of my family and all the other families in the area. My concern with PFAS chemicals is about health. When we're insulted by chemicals, PFAS, lead,
that kind of thing, it changes the behaviors of children and it makes us all a weaker society.
So many different people have worked to create a safer environment passing the new PFAS legislation. But the fight for a truly healthy future has just begun.
There's a lot more that should be done around regulating toxic chemicals in the environment here in Maine and at the federal level.
We're still very concerned about the ongoing production of these PFAS and the fact that federal authorities continue to approve new PFAS chemicals for use in commerce and use in things like food packaging. We really need people out in the communities raising these concerns with their legislators, raising these concerns with the retailers they shop at, and make sure that their voice is heard.
I think prevention has to be top priority because once these heavy metals and PFAS chemicals get into our bodies, they are persistent and very difficult to remove. And the idea of compromising the benefits one individual can contribute to the community over a lifetime in order to have convenience in packaging and wrappers isn't a fair trade. I wouldn't pick convenience over health any day of the week.
To the credit of the new administration under Governor Mills, when they took office, they announced that they were creating a task force that would look at PFAS issues in Maine and make recommendations.
Giving input into how we're going to address and tackle the problem, which is much broader than food packaging, really.
So I think the most important policy is that we stop the use of PFAS in products so they don't get in the environment in the first place. Secondarily, we then need to figure out how to address the PFAS that are already out there.
And some of the PFAS out there lives in farmland, animals, and humans. In 2019, Fred Stone learned more bad news when he got blood work back from the doctor, which was checking PFAS levels in the body.
My wife, myself, and my daughter, we had our blood test done. And the number should be 4. You, whoever else, your number should be right around 4, give or take, of this contamination. My daughter is 20. My wife is 91. And my number is 111. To say that I'm not pissed is probably an understatement.
Fred is a hero for coming forward with his personal story when he could have remained silent. His previous milk contamination and current blood contamination highlight the need for further action.
And we look forward to the task force issuing some strong recommendations.
The task force is a step in the right direction, but more work is necessary. Farming and environmental health are central to Maine's well-being. We must work to create better laws to protect us from PFAS chemicals.
We look forward to working with the legislature in the next session to continue to address PFAS issues and to hopefully implement some of the recommendations that the task force makes.
Who wants chemicals in wrappers for children's food? You have to ask yourself, who wants this for us?